He slammed the door and said, "She's moving in. You're not my problem anymore." I didn't cry. I picked up my keys and called my father. He didn't know my daddy owned the building he worked in. That was the morning everything changed. The air outside was thick with Georgia humidity, even though it was barely past sunrise. My suitcase sat in the driveway, half-zipped, stuffed with church dresses, nightgowns, and one shoe that didn't match the other. He hadn't even let me pack properly, just tossed everything into a bag like I was late rent. The screen door slammed behind me, and I heard her laugh, high and fake, the sound of someone who thinks she's already won. I stood there, barefoot, holding my mug of coffee that had gone cold. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. My name is Clarice Winston. I'm 49 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that silence can be louder than revenge. We'd been married 20 years. Same red brick house outside Decatur, the one with the magnolia tree that leaned just enough to scrape the window on windy nights. I used to love that sound. It reminded me that even old roots move when pushed. Raymond knew how to charm a crowd, smiled big at church, shook hands at the credit union, volunteered at every barbecue like the mayor of good manners. Folks thought we were that couple, the steady ones, the made-it ones. But home told a different story. It started small, like most cracks do, missed calls, late meetings, the faint smell of perfume that didn't belong to me. I ignored it, told myself I was just being sensitive. Women do that. We talk ourselves out of what we already know. By the time I caught the truth, it wasn't even about love anymore. It was about respect. He met her at some regional manager conference down in Savannah. She was younger, flashier. The kind that posts motivational quotes about living your truth and manifesting abundance. Meanwhile, she was manifesting my husband. The first time I saw her was on Facebook, one of those tagged photos you're not supposed to see. Her hand rested on his chest like she already paid the mortgage. I stared at that picture for a long time, waiting for my pulse to slow down. It never did. I didn't confront him that night. I waited. See? I come from a family that doesn't explode. We observe. We gather facts. We stay calm long enough to see who people really are. That Thanksgiving, I cooked for 20. Turkey, dressing, sweet potato pie, the works. My daddy sat at the end of the table, quiet, sipping sweet tea and watching everything like a man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Raymond sat beside me, scrolling his phone. She texted him right there at the table. I saw the smirk crawl up his face, the same sideways grin I used to fall for. My stomach turned. Daddy cleared his throat. "You good, baby girl?" I smiled. "I'm fine, Daddy." I wasn't. A week later, the boxes showed up. My clothes in one, my shoes in another, even the photo albums, our wedding, Mama's funeral, the lake trips, all of it sitting by the front door like trash pickup. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," he said, voice flat. You're not what I need anymore." I looked around that house I'd scrubbed, painted, and filled with peace. I didn't even ask who she was. I already knew. He wanted a reaction. He didn't get one. "You done?" I asked. He frowned. "That's all you have to say? That's all you'll get." Then I picked up my purse, walked outside, and didn't look back. The air smelled like rain and pine needles. I stood by my car for a long time, just breathing. I could have gone to my sister's place or called a friend, but something in me whispered, "Go home." And by home, I meant Daddy's. He lived about 20 minutes out near Stone Mountain. Small house on a hill with a porch that creaked and a flag that hadn't come down since the 4th of July. The lights were on when I pulled up. Daddy was on the porch with a cup of coffee, like he'd been waiting. He didn't ask a single question, just opened the door and said, "You hungry?" I nodded, and that was that. We sat in silence over leftover cornbread and black-eyed peas. He didn't push, just talked about the weather, the church deacon's bad back, the Falcons' losing streak. Then he said one thing that stuck. "Sometimes, baby girl, God don't close a door. He slams it so loud you can't pretend it's still open." I didn't tell him what Raymond said, or that another woman was in my kitchen. I just let the quiet do the talking. The next morning, I unpacked my bags in the guest room. It smelled like cedar and lemon polish. The bedspread was the same one Mama bought from Sears in the 90s, faded but clean. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the trees. My phone buzzed once. His name lit the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I blocked him. Weeks passed. I lived in that slow rhythm of nothingness. Cooked, cleaned, helped Daddy sort mail, even organized his old bank statements for fun. That's when I noticed the letterhead, Winston Financial Holdings. Folks in town knew my daddy as Mr. Winston from church, or that quiet man who keeps to himself. What most didn't know was that he still owned majority shares in the bank where Raymond worked. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not ever. I just watched the patterns. The way Daddy left early some mornings, came back with files and envelopes, phone calls about board meetings and policy reviews. He'd been retired for years, but retired didn't mean powerless. One morning over breakfast, he looked up. "You ever think about getting back into work?" "Maybe," I said. "Something steady. Something that won't break me again." He smiled. "Well, you always did have a good head for numbers." I started. Small, helped him review reports, typed minutes for meetings he didn't feel like attending. Little by little, I learned. He showed me how to read shareholder summaries, how to understand credit margins and audit reports. It felt like stretching muscles I'd forgotten I had. Every time I thought about Raymond, I used that energy to study harder. Months passed. My body healed first. My mind followed. My pride took the longest. Some nights I'd sit on the porch, listening to the cicadas hum, and think about how easily he'd thrown me away. Not with anger, just curiosity. What kind of man builds a life on someone else's loyalty and still feels empty? But God has a way of turning silence into strategy. By the end of summer, Daddy handed me a stack of folders. "These are board minutes," he said. "You'll want to read them." I flipped through. There it was. Raymond Winston, Regional Operations Manager. Same branch he'd bragged about running. Same office he said made him untouchable. I closed the folder slowly and smiled, because the thing about power is you never know who really holds it until the lights come on. I kept that folder on my nightstand for weeks. Didn't rush through it, didn't highlight anything, just read it slow, like scripture. Every time I saw Raymond's name printed under his job title, a strange calm settled over me. Not joy, not revenge, just understanding. The paper even smelled like the bank, ink, dust, and power. The kind of scent that clings to ambition. I'd sit there at night, lamp casting its soft gold glow across the page, listening to the crickets outside Daddy's window. The house would be quiet, save for the slow hum of the ceiling fan and my breath catching every time I turned another page. You see, when someone tries to throw you away, they forget what you're made of. Raymond thought I was soft, thought I'd disappear quietly, cry into old photo albums, or maybe go back to school just to find myself. What he didn't know was that I'd already been found. I just hadn't been seen. He once told me, "You're too stable, Clarice. You don't take risks." I used to take that as criticism. Now I saw it for what it was, projection. He didn't want stability. He wanted applause, wanted noise, wanted to feel like the world owed him something for showing up half prepared. By the time the new fiscal year rolled around, I was attending those board meetings beside my father, not as a visitor, as a stakeholder, quiet, composed, and always 2 steps ahead. The first time someone addressed me as Ms. Winston in that boardroom, it was like hearing my own name for the first time in years. The sound hit something deep in my chest. I looked up and saw the flicker in their eyes, surprise, maybe confusion. Those older white men had been nodding through PowerPoints for decades, passing authority back and forth like salt at dinner. I didn't smile. I nodded back and took notes. Wasn't about ego. It was about reclaiming the voice I'd buried. Meanwhile, Raymond was busy playing house with her, Chanel or Chantel, or some name that sounded expensive. I heard from mutuals that he'd moved her into our home within days, painted over the accent wall I'd done by hand, threw out the quilt my mother stitched the year she died. They hosted cookouts, posed for pictures on the porch. I pressure washed every spring, posted captions about fresh starts and God's timing. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pitiful. He flaunted his promotion like it came from brilliance, not the connections he made through me. That man didn't even know which forms needed triple sign-off until I coached him through his first quarterly audit. But I digress. When pride walks into a room, humility quietly steps out. Raymond had never learned that balance. One night, while Daddy and I were eating leftover pot roast, he handed me another file. Slim. No label. "Read this tomorrow," he said. But curiosity's a stubborn thing. I opened it right there at the table. Inside was a proposal, a restructuring plan that would transfer active oversight of the Decatur branch to me while keeping Raymond in place under a new title, Assistant Regional Liaison. A demotion in every sense, though dressed up in neutral language. I looked at Daddy. "You planned this?" He didn't flinch. He played himself. All I did was set the board up to notice. "But you didn't have to give it to me." He set down his fork. "No, I didn't. But I watched you. Watched how you got up every day, never complained. Studied those reports like they were medicine. Baby girl, you earned this." I didn't cry, but my throat closed up like it was trying to. He reached over, squeezed my hand once, then went back to eating. Like it was nothing. Like he hadn't just handed me back my dignity in a manila folder. The next week, I attended my first formal oversight meeting. And there he was, Raymond, 2 chairs down, flipping through papers he didn't understand, pretending to listen, pretending he still mattered in the way he used to. He didn't see me at first. But when the regional director introduced me, Clarice Winston, our newest executive oversight lead, his head snapped up like someone had lit a match under his chair. His eyes met mine. He blinked, twice, then looked away. I could almost hear the sound of his pride cracking like old wood. I didn't speak to him during that meeting, didn't even glance his way again. I asked 3 questions, clarified 2 misfiled reports, and closed my folder when the room went quiet. But in that silence, I could feel his whole body shrinking. That's what power does. Not loud, not messy, just undeniable. A week later, I made my first unannounced branch visit. Walked in with my badge, clipboard in hand, no makeup, just grace. The kind that comes from knowing you've got nothing left to prove. The receptionist looked nervous. The assistant manager ran to the back. Then Raymond emerged. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but spiritually, like a man who'd played checkers too long at a chess table. "Clarice," he said. "Mr. Winston," I corrected. He nodded slowly. "So, this is you now." "This has always been me," I said. He shifted on his feet, tugged at his tie, trying to find words that might rebuild what he burned. The air between us was thick with everything unspoken. The lies, the years, the quiet I'd carried. We went over the quarterly operations review like professionals. I pointed out discrepancies in the expense reports, asked about staffing ratios, noted his missing signatures. He kept answering with that same low hum of embarrassment, his pen clicking nervously every few seconds. I didn't mention the past, didn't ask about his situation. When I stood to leave, he tried to speak. "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." Then I walked out. Didn't wait for his excuse. Didn't need to hear it. I'd already heard everything I needed the day he threw my life onto that driveway like garbage day. In the weeks that followed, small changes unfolded, quiet as rain. He was placed under mentorship, told to resubmit budgets for review, bonuses frozen, travel approvals redirected through my desk. I didn't have to lift a finger. I just let the systems he once worshipped correct themselves. And still, I said nothing. Some folks thought I was being too soft. Thought I should fire him outright, reclaim the house, change the locks, stage a public takedown. But I wasn't interested in theatrics. I wanted truth. I wanted him to sit with the weight of what he'd lost and realize he handed it away. Word spread quietly. People started looking at me different, not as Raymond's wife, but as Ms. Winston. I got invited to speak at local credit unions, asked to mentor young women entering finance, honored at a luncheon hosted by Black women in banking. My name grew in circles he used to dominate. At one event, a young woman came up to me afterward. Her voice trembled as she said, "Ms. Winston, I just left a man who told me I was too much. Seeing you up there tonight, it reminded me I'm enough." That one hit me deep. I smiled, thanked her, and went home that night feeling something new. Not pride, not vindication, but peace. But the most satisfying moment? I was at Kroger one afternoon, cart full of collard greens, smoked turkey necks, and a lemon cake I didn't need, the kind of ordinary peace I used to pray for. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that soft grocery store hum blending with the low whir of refrigerator fans. I rounded the corner near frozen foods, and there he was, Raymond, wearing khakis 2 inches too short and a polo shirt that used to fit him better. He looked tired, not just from work, but from life, the kind of tired that comes when every mirror starts telling the truth. He saw me, stopped mid-step. "Clarice." I kept my hand on the cart, looked him dead in the eye. He opened his mouth like he wanted to apologize, or explain, or beg. I nodded once, then turned and walked away. Never said a word. Because sometimes silence is the loudest sound in the room. I didn't drive straight home that day after seeing Raymond in Kroger. I took the long way, down Wesley Chapel, past the gas station we used to stop at after Sunday service, past the barber shop where he'd sit for hours like he was solving world problems. The same cracked pavement, the same stray dog sleeping under the stop sign. Everything looked smaller. Or maybe I was just seeing it with clearer eyes. The sky hung low, heavy with August heat. Cicadas screamed from the trees, that endless summer choir that never took a breath. My car windows were down, the warm air whipping through like the last gasp of something dying slow. I passed the corner store where we'd once argued about money, the red brick church where we used to hold hands during prayer, the car wash where he'd joke about keeping things clean. It all hit different now, like looking at a photograph you've outgrown. When I finally turned into Daddy's driveway, the sun had started to set. That deep, syrupy orange light spilled across the yard, painting the porch in soft gold. Daddy was sitting there like always, cigar in one hand, newspaper from 2 days ago in the other, legs crossed like a man who had nothing left to chase. He looked up before I even parked. His eyes said it before his mouth did. "You saw him, didn't you?" I nodded, leaning against the car door. He looked tired. Daddy took a long puff, exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. The smoke drifted between us, curling like words he didn't need to say. "Good," he said finally. "Let him stay tired." That was it. No sermon. No, "I told you so." Just truth in its simplest form. We didn't talk about it again. Some things don't need repeating. The next morning, I woke before dawn, made coffee, fed the neighbor's stray cat that kept showing up like clockwork, sat at the kitchen table and watched the sky turn from indigo to pink. That's when it hit me. I wasn't angry anymore, not at him, not at myself, just ready. So I poured myself into the work, not to escape, but to build. I launched a program through the bank called Daughters of Credit, focused on teaching single Black mothers how to restore their credit, apply for business loans, and understand ownership. It started as a small pilot project in one county. Within 6 months, it spread to 4. Over 100 women enrolled. I made sure the pamphlets looked like us, spoke like us. No corporate jargon, no polished nonsense about financial literacy initiatives, just plain truth. Front page said, "You're not broke, you're just uninformed." Inside, in bold type, Bad credit ain't a curse, it's a clue. Every Thursday, I hosted sessions at the old Masonic Hall on Glenwood. We served boxed dinners, baked chicken, green beans, cornbread, and a slice of pound cake from Miss Ruth down the block. The smell of it filled the whole hall before class even started. Sometimes the women brought their kids, toddlers coloring on folding tables, babies sleeping in carriers. Sometimes they came straight from work, still in scrubs or gas station uniforms, name tags half peeled, eyes red but full of grit. I'd stand at the front, whiteboard behind me, saying things like, "Don't let shame talk you out of learning. Ain't nobody born knowing how to budget." Or, "Debt collectors ain't demons. They're distractions. You control the story, not them." And I'd watch heads nod, pens move, hope flicker back into eyes that had gone dim from trying to survive. That's when I felt the most whole. Not when I sat in the big office downtown, not even when my name appeared on performance memos Raymond had to initial. No. The real joy came when I saw a woman walk into that hall looking ashamed and leave standing taller. That was legacy. That was inheritance. One that couldn't be stolen, cheated on, or moved into by some side piece in a Fashion Nova dress. Meanwhile, Raymond was unraveling in slow motion. It started with little things. A late report here, a missed deadline there. Then came the audit discrepancies, numbers that didn't line up, charges to the corporate card that made no sense, a hotel room booked for a conference that never happened. He blamed admin. Then he blamed his assistant. Then he blamed confusion in accounting. But what he never did was blame himself. The board noticed, quiet whispers in meetings, a couple of performance concerns buried in polite memos. Eventually, it reached Daddy's desk. He didn't gloat, didn't even smirk. He just slid the folder across the table to me one evening after dinner. "Handle it," he said. The board meeting was held the following week. Big glass room, cold air conditioning, humming like judgment. Daddy sat at the end of the table, arms folded, eyes sharp but calm. The kind of presence that didn't have to speak to be heard. I led the meeting. My voice didn't shake. I laid out every inconsistency, every misstep, every unnecessary expense that had cost the branch thousands. I spoke clearly, slowly, letting each fact sit in the air like a weight. No opinions, just numbers. At the end, I handed over a sealed envelope. Inside was my recommendation: 6-month probation with reduced pay, weekly check-ins, and a mandatory retraining course under junior management. Raymond didn't say a word, just sat there blinking. His hands were folded, but his thumb kept rubbing his wedding band finger. Empty now, but muscle memory's a cruel thing. He looked lost, like a man who had just realized the ground under him was no longer solid. I stood, smoothed my skirt. "Thank you all for your time," I said. The room was silent. As I turned to leave, I looked at him one last time. "Be grateful," I said softly. "Some lessons come softer than we deserve." He didn't follow me out. I didn't expect him to. Weeks later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. The paper was creased, folded 3 times like he couldn't decide whether to send it. The handwriting was the same, slanted, impatient. It read, "Clarice, I don't expect forgiveness. I barely expect you to read this, but I need you to know something. I was wrong about everything. I thought I needed more, but the truth is, I had everything when I had you. I see that now. R." I read it once, then again. The ink was smudged in one corner, like he'd set the pen down mid-thought. I could almost hear his voice in those words. Almost. I folded the letter and tucked it inside my Bible, not out of sentiment, out of record-keeping. Some things need to be remembered, not to hold a grudge, but to remind yourself what you survived. I never wrote back. The world kept spinning. I kept building. One Friday evening, I attended a fundraising gala for small business development at the downtown Civic Center. My team insisted I go. They were giving me an award for excellence in community financial leadership. the kind of long, fancy title that makes you smile even if you're tired. The lights were warm, the tables covered in white linen. Jazz floated through the speakers, soft and steady. Cameras flashed. The mayor gave a speech about empowerment and legacy. And then they called my name. I walked to the stage, heels clicking against marble, applause swelling like a wave. When I looked out at the crowd, I saw faces of women I'd helped, mothers, daughters, small business owners, survivors. And then, near the back, Raymond, standing by the exit, wearing an old gray suit that didn't fit like it used to, hairline thinner, smile tighter. He clapped, slow, polite. Didn't meet my eyes. I stood there for a moment, holding the award. The lights were blinding, but I could still make out the shape of him. Still, I said nothing. When I stepped off the podium, I passed him without stopping. It wasn't cold. It wasn't bitter. It was peace. See, people think revenge is fire and noise, but sometimes it's just a full life lived without them in it. A quiet morning, a balance sheet in the black, a classroom full of women learning how to write their own names on deeds. That's the kind of justice that doesn't fade when the applause dies. I didn't need him to be punished. I needed him to know I didn't need him. And he knew. That's what mattered. It was the first Friday of the month, and the sun hadn't even broken the horizon yet, but I was already dressed. Navy suit pressed, heels by the door, purse over my shoulder. The house smelled like fresh coffee and lemon polish, that mix of comfort and order that always made me feel steady before a long day. The floorboards creaked as I moved through the kitchen. Daddy was still asleep, the morning news whispering from the living room TV left on low. The porch light glowed faint through the blinds, and outside the world was still somewhere between night and dawn, soft, gray, and waiting. I always liked starting my rounds early, caught folks off guard. No time to stage anything or fix what was already broken. The early hours told the truth. That morning, my first stop was the Decatur branch, Raymond's branch. It had been months since his demotion. From what I'd heard through quiet channels, he'd been keeping his head down. No more business lunches at Ruth's Soul Kitchen. No more local interviews or photo ops with city council. Just clocking in, clocking out, hiding behind spreadsheets, and silence. I pulled into the parking lot just before 7:45. The sky was streaked in peach and lavender, the kind of color that makes you stop for a second, even when you're not the stopping type. Dew clung to the hood of my car, catching the early light like glass beads. I sat there for a moment, engine running, hands still on the wheel. Sometimes victory doesn't feel like fireworks. Sometimes it's just a deep breath that finally lands right in your chest. Inside, the lobby lights flickered on one row at a time, and the air smelled like old toner, burnt coffee and nervous energy, the sound of printers warming up, the shuffle of papers being straightened that didn't need straightening. I caught a few whispers as I walked through, small voices, cautious glances. Clipboard in hand, heels clicking like a metronome, I moved through that space like I owned it. Not because I wanted to prove it, but because I finally knew it was true. Raymond was at his desk, eyes fixed on his monitor, pretending not to see me until I was right in front of the glass. I knocked once. He stood immediately, that reflex of a man who still recognized authority, even when he wished he didn't. "Miss Winston." His voice cracked just enough to betray him. "Good morning," I said, flat and even. "Didn't know you were coming in today." "That's the point." He gestured stiffly toward the chair across from his desk. I didn't sit. I flipped open my folder. "Your last report had 3 unresolved discrepancies. Tell me why." He cleared his throat. "There was an error in the new budgeting software. The admin team's been retrained." I cut him off. "Your name is on every approval line, Mr. Winston. I don't want excuses. I want corrections." He blinked, swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." That's when I saw it. Not fear, not anger. Something smaller. Resignation. The kind of quiet surrender that comes when a man finally realizes the room doesn't bend around him anymore. He stood there in that suit that used to fit like power but now hung like burden. His tie slightly crooked, collar too tight. Even his watch, once polished and flashing, looked dull. I gave him his updated compliance checklist, signed my initials, and closed the folder with one soft click. Then I walked out without another word. In the elevator, I exhaled slow, not out of relief, but clarity. It was done. The version of me that needed him to see me, hear me, validate me. She was gone. The elevator doors closed, and with that soft metal hum, something inside me closed too. The next week, I finalized something I'd been working on quietly with the board, a transition plan. Not for Raymond, for me. It was time. Time to move from Decatur oversight to regional development. Bigger picture. Less micromanaging, more meaning. I'd built enough now to step back without it crumbling, and I wanted to make space for other women. Women like Shalita, the sharp analyst from Macon who reminded me of myself at 30. Bright, humble, but afraid to speak too loud. Or Naomi, who raised 3 boys and ran a full loan department without ever taking a sick day. I wanted them to see that leadership didn't have to mean losing yourself. Before I left, I scheduled one final site visit, not to check numbers, to pass the torch. The staff gathered in the conference room, early, alert, notebooks open. Raymond wasn't invited. I introduced Shalita as the new oversight lead. The young woman stood tall, hands shaking just a little as she thanked me. I could see the pride in her eyes, the kind that comes when someone finally sees your worth before the world does. "You're in good hands," I told the team. "Don't wait for permission to lead, just lead." Heads nodded. A few smiles. I saw something in that room I hadn't seen in a long time. Ease. Afterward, I stepped out back, leaned against the brick wall, and let the spring breeze wrap around me. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of freshly cut grass and diesel from the morning deliveries. Pink dogwoods bloomed along the fence line. Life was moving forward, even if nobody noticed. That's when I heard footsteps. Raymond. He walked up slow, hands in his pockets, his shoulders carrying a kind of tired that no amount of rest fixes. "Clarice," he said, "not Ms. Winston this time." His tone was quiet, uncertain. I turned, said nothing. I wanted to say thank you for not ruining me. I blinked once. "You did that yourself." He nodded, looking down at the ground like the answer had been waiting there the whole time. "Still, you could have made it worse." "I deserved worse." "Probably," I said, "but I wasn't raised like that." He looked up then, eyes softer than I remembered. "Do you ever miss us?" The question hung between us, heavy and hollow. I tilted my head. "I miss who I thought you were, but I don't miss pretending." He took that in. His jaw tightened, then loosened. "I hope you're happy," he said finally. "I am." And I was. He nodded once, like he believed me, or maybe just wanted to. Then he walked away slower than he came. No drama, no final plea, just a man retreating from something he never truly understood. I stayed out there for a while, watching the breeze stir the branches. The dogwood petals fluttered down around me like tiny pink confetti, soft as forgiveness. The old me would have felt the need to prove something in that moment, to say one last line, to twist the knife, to make sure the hurt matched the history. But growth is quiet, and I'd already won. I drove home with the windows down, Anita Baker humming low through the speakers. The wind tangled through my hair, the sun poured over the dashboard, and for once, my shoulders weren't carrying anything that didn't belong to me. The world looked softer, wider, like it had been waiting for me to notice it again. That night, I sat on the porch with Daddy. The crickets were out, the sky clear enough to see the first few stars. He had his old cigar resting in the ashtray, smoke curling lazy into the night. I told him about the transition, about handing things off, about the young women stepping up. He listened without interrupting, just nodded slow, that small, proud smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Told you, baby girl," he said, tapping ash into the tray. "Doors don't close. They shift." I leaned back in my chair, the wood cool under my palms, looked up at the stars sprinkled over that Georgia sky. "You were right," I said. He chuckled low. "Course I was." We sat there a long time, saying nothing else. The cicadas sang. The night air settled soft. It was the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore, the kind that meant peace. And that was the night I stopped thinking about Raymond for good, not because I forgot, but because I no longer needed the memory. The first morning I didn't have to think about Raymond felt like a kind of rebirth. I woke up early, not from worry, but from peace. No knots in my stomach, no phantom phone buzz from a man who used to lie in my face and call it love. Just sunlight slipping through the blinds, soft and golden, and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the old wall clock that used to hang in Mama's kitchen. I stood there in my robe, bare feet against the cool tile, and for the first time in years, my reflection in the window didn't look like a stranger. It looked like me. I wrapped my robe tighter and stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under my weight, same as they had for decades, but somehow it sounded like music now, a rhythm of survival. Daddy had already left for his morning walk. I could still see his footprints in the dew along the walkway. The wind was soft, carrying that sweet spring scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started, and a few birds called out, almost harmonizing, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I had nothing to prove to anybody. Later that afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office. The road shimmered under the Georgia sun, the air heavy with that early summer warmth that makes you roll the windows down, even if the AC works fine. I had an appointment, not for myself, but for the Daughters of Credit Foundation. That little program I'd started in the back room of the Masonic Hall had outgrown its shell. The women I'd taught were teaching others now. The community had rallied around it. And then a local church trust stepped in, donating a full commercial unit to serve as our permanent space. All it needed now was a name on paper, a deed, a legacy. Inside the clerk's office, it smelled faintly of paper and toner. The woman behind the desk had a neat bun and glasses that sat low on her nose. She smiled politely when I handed her my folder. "You're the founder?" "Yes, ma'am." She typed for a while, fingers clicking like tiny hammers of progress. Then she slid the stack of documents toward me. The ink pen she handed me was warm from her hand. When I signed and saw my name printed bold and black under founder and executive director, something deep in my chest shifted, like a door opening inward, quietly but completely. I'd spent so many years being someone else's backbone, his cheerleader, his support, his silent partner in his success. Now, finally, I had something that carried my name, built from my pain, yes, but also from my power. The clerk stamped the paper, the sound sharp and final. She smiled. "Congratulations, Ms. Winston." I smiled back. "Thank you. This one's for the women nobody saw coming." I didn't throw a party, didn't post about it online. I went home, framed the document, and hung it on the wall right above Mama's old Bible. Her bookmark was still tucked in Psalms, the same place she left it the week before she passed. I opened the worn pages, read a few lines about mercy, about restoration, about still waters and green pastures. Then I closed it gently. Everything I'd ever needed to know had been in that book all along. I just needed the storm to make me look for it. A few days later, I went back to the Decatur branch. One last time, not for an inspection, not for a meeting, just to close the loop. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The sun was high, warm, and unapologetic when I walked through those glass doors. The lobby buzzed with quiet activity. Printers humming, phones ringing, that faint smell of paper and sanitizer. Shalita was at the front desk, sharp as ever in her coral blazer. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Miss Winston." "Morning, baby," I said. "You doing all right?" She nodded. "Trying to make you proud." "You already do." And she did. The branch ran smoother now, cleaner energy, no more fake smiles or tension hiding behind polite words. Raymond saw me before I saw him. I could feel it, that pause in the air, that awareness that travels before a man finds his courage. When I turned, he was already standing. Tie slightly askew, shoulders slumped. His desk was tidy, but his eyes weren't. "Miss Winston?" he said automatically, like the title was a shield he couldn't put down. "I'm not staying," I said. My voice was calm, measured. "Just came to drop this off." I handed him a small folder, one copy of the Foundation's flyer, our mission statement, and a thank you card. Not a thank you for what he did, but for what it taught me. He opened it, careful, like the paper might cut him. Inside was one line in clean cursive ink. "Thank you for setting me free." His eyes flicked up to meet mine. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I nodded once. "Be well, Raymond." Then I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels echoed across the polished floor. Slow, deliberate, final. Just as I reached the door, I heard him behind me. "I didn't know your father owned the company," he said quietly. I stopped, just for a second. "You didn't know a lot of things," I said, "but now you do." And with that, I left. No drama, no applause, just closure. Weeks later, I got an invitation to speak at the Women in Finance Summit in Chicago, the kind of event with glass podiums, catered lunches, and rows of women in navy suits holding tablets. The topic? Resilience and reinvention. When I stepped onto that stage, the lights were bright, the kind that make you blink twice before you speak. The air smelled faintly of perfume and fresh coffee. I gripped the podium and looked out at a sea of faces. Women young and old, some smiling, some holding notebooks tight like armor. I didn't give them a fairy tale. I gave them the truth. I told them I didn't rise. I rebuilt, brick by brick, lesson by lesson, silent night by silent night. I told them success isn't loud. It's steady. It's not being seen first. It's being seen after they counted you out. It's not about revenge. It's about redemption. And as I spoke, I saw nods ripple through the crowd, tears on cheeks, laughter in the quiet parts. When I finished, they stood. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better, sincere. After the speech, a young woman approached me near the stage stairs. Couldn't have been older than 28. Her hands trembled as she clutched her conference badge. "Ms. Winston," she said, her voice breaking, "I was in a situation just like yours. I didn't think I'd ever get out. You made me believe I can still make something out of it." I smiled and pulled her in for a hug. "Baby," I whispered, "you can make something better than what you had. Don't let nobody convince you otherwise." Her tears fell on my shoulder, warm and grateful. I squeezed her hand before she walked away, head held higher than before. That moment, that right there, was worth more than any award, any applause, any headline. On the flight home, I got the window seat. The city below looked like a quilt stitched from light and motion. Somewhere down there was the house I used to cry in, the man who used to doubt me, the life I once thought I'd die without. Now I had something more precious than revenge. I had peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I was. That evening, when I walked into my home, the scent of lavender and lemon oil greeted me. I kicked off my shoes, set my purse down, and poured a glass of iced tea. Anita Baker played low on the stereo, her voice warm and familiar, wrapping around the room like an old friend. I sat down at the kitchen table, sunlight fading soft through the curtains, and let the quiet hold me, the kind of quiet you earn, the kind that says, "You made it." For a long moment, I just sat there, breathing, smiling, still. Then I whispered to myself, half prayer, half declaration, it's done. And it was. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.